Hi, good morning. It's Gene from maverickstar Observatory. I've got a few things I want to talk about. I haven't scripted any of them, as I usually don't, so I might even miss a couple of them. But the most important thing is, what I've been trying to do over the last few days is just bring new ideas out for people to explore. Because at the moment we've got a global governance which is blaming CO2 on the climate, and what I wanted to do is just see if there is anything else that fits the criteria, which would be the real reason for them wanting to reduce CO2. Now obviously in the last couple of videos we've been talking about crude oil, and the title of yesterday's one is, as you can see there, has the world's crude oil already run out? And I think it's a legitimate question. We've got a lot of people, and I'll just show you a few, but before I do, I want to talk about the hit and run merchants that have thumbed it down. Just want to say to you people, I know you're going to be about today because you get a little thrill and a kick out of it, and you are the weird people in our modern society. Why don't you put your name down there so we can all see who you are, you can identify yourself, and why don't you just put down the reason why you're thumbing the video down? Just be a little bit braver than being the person in the dark hitting the thumb down button. Come forward, let's see who you are, and let's see what your gripes are, and let's see if we can address them. Otherwise, you are just a pain in the arse. Okay, so there was a couple of comments that we had yesterday, just the first three. I'll go through them. Somehow large oil fields that have been abandoned when empty seem to have filled up again. Another one, oil isn't run out at all. It's a natural occurring substance, like saying we're running low on water or running low on magma. Just not the case. And then we've got Wise Up with Reasley. The world's oil will never run out. It's a natural byproduct of the Earth's plasma core. We've got a lot of confused people, and a lot of these people simply don't know how crude oil is formed and how long it takes to form. So let's just go through this first of all. Okay, so if any of these people had just done a couple of Google researches on crude oil and how it's formed, they would have had the answer, and they wouldn't have made, in my view, such a comment as what they did. The fast facts on crude oil. Crude oil is a natural occurring fossil fuel, meaning it comes from the remains of dead organisms. I'll just explain what those organisms are. It's algae and zooplankton, and these are creatures that live in the oceans millions of years ago. They absorbed the carbon out of the atmosphere, and when they died they settled on the sea floor, and over millions of years these layers would have formed, and then there would have been a lot of weight compressing them, and then they would have degraded and gone through a process and ended up today as what we drill for, crude oil. So the problem is when they say the world will never run out of crude oil, well, it certainly will, and when it's gone it will never be, it won't be replenished overnight. Let's just say that. For simple fact is, if we go back millions and millions of years ago, our atmosphere was saturated in carbon. So, it took millions of years to clean it out of the atmosphere and for it to form on the ocean floor. Today, we haven't got that much oxygen in our that much CO2 in the atmosphere, and there's no way we're going to replenish the stocks overnight with the amounts that we've got. I mean, what was it we measured the other day? 440 parts per million. Not even a drop really, or a measurable amount in the composition of our atmosphere. Let's just say that. So, their statements, what they're saying is not true. The thing is the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because, what we're seeing right now is countries that used to be very rich in crude oil, like the United States, making a lot of efforts to purchase crude oil from all other countries around the world. And I mentioned those countries, and one of them is actually considered to be an enemy of the United States, and we're talking Russia. And Russia are selling Americans now crude oil, as well as rocket engines, and as well as taking American astronauts up to the space station. So you have to ask the question, is CO2, as they are portraying it, damaging the atmosphere to the point where man is modified the climate and we're experiencing, like they say, global warming and climate change? Or is there another reason for wanting to reduce CO2? Is because, we simply are running out of a resource that was, known to be running low many years ago, and have we reached the critical point where there is only a small amount of years left of this precious commodity, which is not, as some people think, replenished overnight? So I hope those people have a better understanding of, how crude oil is formed, that it takes millions of years, that it is not easily replenishable. Yes, it is a naturally occurring substance, but only through means of a long amount of time. And, it can only be replaced at the rates it was if there is a surplus amount of carbon in the atmosphere, which there isn't. So, what I'm trying to do is come up with another reason as to why these governments are moving in a direction as they are. And when you look at what I'm coming at, the angle that I'm coming at, that perhaps we have got just a little bit of the crude oil left in the world, then that would be a good reason for them taking the approach that they are, in that they want to come up with alternative methods of producing electricity, and we know that they are doing that, as well as producing electric cars, because obviously if we're running out of crude oil, we're not going to be able to run our family cars if they are combustion engines and rely on petroleum or diesel. So, and if there was a time limit as to how much was estimated left of this valuable product, crude oil, then you would understand why they say by the year 2030 we want to be zero carbon emissions, and we want most people to be driving electric vehicles. We are facing a lot of problems, because I don't think that this, if it is the case, and I think it's a good idea to come up with, put on the table other reasons as to why the government are moving in a certain direction, because it might be true for one. This might be the real reason why there is so much talk about about CO2 and things like that. The real reason could be quite frightening. If they announced, if that was the case and they announced it tomorrow, could you imagine that? Would you go and buy a combustion engine tomorrow? You wouldn't. Simply because, what's the point in having a nice brand new car on your drive when the petrol or diesel is no longer produced for it? It's not just that. We would shut down manufacturing tomorrow of all these car manufacturing plants, which would put millions of people out of work, cost manufacturing millions of pounds. And they know the development of electric vehicles takes time. So, they would have to have a huge plan in place in order for this to, slowly come about. So I hope we cleared up the fact that crude oil is not replenished, and there's not, an endless supply of it. It will run out, simply because it's not being replaced at the rate we're extracting it. There's a couple of other things as well. Why would these companies go to the extreme of drilling to the depths they do if it was that easy to get? When they first started drilling for oil, they could find it at 3,500 feet on average. Now some of the drilling goes down to 40,000 feet. Some of the methods used now are not the same as what there was. It was just a simple fact of drilling till you hit the oil. But these days, it's not the case. They have to use fracking methods. It's not just for gas, shale gas. It's also for oil as well. Fracking's used in oil exploration as well now. But, it's the efforts that they're having to go to get it. It's no longer that readily available. They're having to set up these oil rigs offshore. So, obviously, if they're having to go to these extreme levels to find these oil pockets, things must be getting a little bit more difficult, and things must be getting rarer. So again, when you look at countries like the United States, which is supposed to be, crude oil rich, why then are they going to Saudi Arabia, Russia and other countries like Venezuela and everywhere else for their crude? You know, and then when you add in the question, why are they such friends with Saudi Arabia when they have such horrific human rights violations? Why are they still doing business with them? Well, you know, if you're running out of oil, you're going to turn a blind eye to a lot of things simply because you don't want the mechanisms of your country grinding to a halt. And, you know, equally, that's why you're going to deal now with your enemies, because things have got that bad, you've got no choice but to purchase off them. If America has got that much crude oil, then why is it going to all the other countries around the world to purchase it? Why are they going to, you know, the lengths of creating wars in some of these Middle East countries? Is it because they want the oil? What was Iraq all about, really? Because, you know, what we're led to believe it was about 9/11. You know, Saddam was funding some guy in a hole in a mountain, Osama bin Laden, because he was, you know, committing terrorist attacks on American soil. He'd knocked down the Twin Towers, therefore we had to go to war, as well as with America. I mean, we went there as allies to conquer Iraq. But was it for the oil? Because the first thing that Saddam Hussein done was, at the beginning of the opening of the war, was set fire to all the oil fields. Was it because he knew that we were coming for his oil? Just putting these questions out there, guys, because this seems to fit. Or at least it seems to fit better than what we're being told right now about CO2 being man-made and causing, you know, climate change. Especially when we look at this record that goes back, you know, 650,000 years ago. You know, we can see that CO2 levels have been at higher rates than what they are right now many times. But we've only been apparently here, Homo sapiens, 42,000 years. So what was driving the CO2 in the climate back then? Wasn't human beings. And it very likely isn't the case that human beings are driving the CO2 levels up right now. It could be just a natural process, but it is a perfect angle if you have ran out of your crude oil, because it fits nicely with your plan, because you can still do away with petrol engines, because you ain't going to be able to find the fuel to run those petrol engines in the future. And if you want to push environmentally green projects such as building more wind generators and more solar panels around the world and powering cities by those means, then it fits again, doesn't it? You know, we get a lot of criticism on this channel, and a lot of it is because we present new ideas, and yet this idea seems to be very simple. And, you know, a lot of you, I'm sure, have heard of Occam's razor. That which tends to be the simplest tends to be the truth. This might be, in that case, the truth. We're running out of crude oil on this earth. And, you know, as a result, we are having to make very fast, dramatic changes in the way in which we go about our business. In other words, we need to abandon the combustion engine and engines that run on crude oil or use the means of crude oil refinery, and we need to find alternative methods of powering our cities if we want to keep the cogs turning in our cities, that is, because we know when the power doesn't flow into the cities become stagnant, because they are artificial environments that rely heavily on energy going into them, logistics going into them. And when you haven't got the fuel to run the energy companies and run the trucks and the logistic equipment that goes into the cities, they fall apart. There are a lot of problems that we're facing, and, you know, as we are now seeing, you know, the environment can change. We can have Arctic blasts which stop the production or the usage of things like wind turbines and solar panels. And scientists are trying to find alternative ways of creating electricity, and nuclear power is one of the ones that seems to be reliable under most of these circumstances that we're getting thrown at. And we're also seeing a lot of investment go into these new reactors, which are what they're called. They're not plasma reactors. There is plasma in them. Fusion power, which in my view is never going to work. They built the fusion reactor. They didn't get it sustained for 1 minute. And then they've built an even bigger one yet, which hasn't been finished. And I guess that won't work either. And I think it's because they're using it on the principles of what they know how the sun works. But they haven't still, to this day, after spending billions of pounds, found that they can get that reaction stable and self-sustaining. And when you look at what they're proposing with this method of producing electricity, the thing has to be taken apart and the parts need to be replaced, and it's really complex. And first of all, they haven't got it sustainable. They haven't had one of these machines run for 10 minutes. So I have very little hope in these coming online in the future, producing quantities of power for us. So if this is true and crude oil really is running out, and if you look at all the facts, it does seem to be the case, then we are facing not just problems which the natural environment is throwing at us. We're facing big problems because we're running out of something that we're addicted to and heavily reliant on, and it is now at a very limited amount. The other thing is, if we have extinguished almost the crude oil on this planet, then we have done more damage to the chemical industries and the pharmaceutical industries, because the amount of products that come from crude oil are, in a lot of scientists' views, wasted on producing just petroleum and diesel products. And then we've got people, I'm glad I thought about this, we've got people thinking about, we can just produce biofuels. And the big problem is with this is that when you start producing biofuels, you need vast quantities of growing land, and you're producing just one particular type of crop, and therefore you're changing the ecology of that land and its natural inhabitants of that land. And in some cases, some species will go extinct as a result of that. And this is valuable land that we're using for ethanol that could be used for agricultural crop production. And guys, you guys know as well as I do, we are facing a crisis at the moment because of the climate change with growing the amounts of food in which we need to consume. And we've got another problem. We're expanding our population still on this planet. And we got. I can keep going and going and going. We've got lots of problems, lots and lots of problems. We're increasing the rate of technology, and that is detriment to the workforce, because every time we come up with a new technology, we do away with jobs. I mean, we are going to merge very shortly into a world where cars are driving themselves, trucks are driving themselves, and that is going to put millions of people out of job. We don't need really pilots in the planes anymore, because they pretty much fly by wire in any case. And planes aren't built like they were 30 years ago, where the pilot could easily take over autopilot. In pretty much these days, there is if the power fails in an aircraft, and I know there is backups after backups after backups, but if the power fails, his little joystick is not connected to anything other than the avionics department. And if the avionics department says no, then he's got nothing but a joystick in his hand to fiddle with whilst the plane falls out of the sky uncontrollable. So we are merging into a world of in my view, something that is is gearing up to fail. And for a lot of reasons it's going to fail. And on top of that, what we're creating, our situation that we've created ourselves and the problems that we're created, which puts us in a massive threat, we're also having to deal with the other realities, like the magnetic poles reversing. And that's a rare event that humanity has never seen and certainly never recorded. And we just don't simply know what will be the implications of, you know, those poles reversing when they decide to. And we are probably, you know, a couple of years away from you know, the dipoles going from the strong field lines, which allow them to migrate slowly, into the weak field lines where they rapidly migrate. And if what we've seen over the last 30 years is anything to go by, you know, and the slow deterioration of the jet streams, which has led to the climate change that we've got right now, then if something rapid happens, then surely it is logically to think that, you know, during that time when things are rapidly moving, that they are also, you know, these effects that we're seeing and experiencing, like flash floods, droughts, Arctic temperatures, the magnitude and frequency of those events are going to increase as well during that time of the reversal. Guys, I'm going to end the video here. And I know for a lot of you, you're going to switch off right now because you don't want to hear the fact that I'm going to say, you know, you can support our observatory. But I'll say it anyhow. There's a link down there if you want to help support what we do. We don't just talk like little voices. We've actually got equipment in the field that measure what is taking place with regards to the poles on our Earth. And if you're interested in supporting something like that, then the link's there. And if not, then continue giving your your tax monies to governments where they tell you they'll spend it on whatever they want and not give you any feedback on what they've spent it on. So yeah, it's the world we live in, isn't it? So, you know, I'll say what I usually do. You know, take care of your loved ones, and as always, bye for now.